He was a billionaire CEO, the king of Manhattan, about to close a $20 billion deal. She was a waitress, invisible, carrying a tray of champagne he didn't even look at. As he and his high-powered lawyers laughed about their victory, one stray sentence, one tiny clause number, drifted across the room. The waitress froze. It was a mistake, not a typo, but a $3 billion, company-destroying, life-ending mistake. He told her, "You don't understand contracts." What he didn't know was that she was the one who wrote the book on them, and she was about to collect a debt he never knew he owed. The Gilded Apex was not a restaurant, it was a statement. Perched 70 floors above the glittering spine of Manhattan, it was a place where mortals did not dine. Gods of industry, titans of finance, and the political puppets they controlled. They were the clientele. The air itself felt expensive, thick with the scent of truffle oil, aged leather, and an unspoken, suffocating arrogance. For Elena Sanchez, it was a prison. At 27, Elena's life was a study in brutal contrasts. By day, she navigated the suffocating confines of a rent-controlled, one-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the dominant sound was the rattling wheeze of her father's oxygen machine. By night, she wore the starched black and white uniform of the Gilded Apex, balancing trays laden with food that cost more than her monthly paycheck. Her hands, slender and scarred with small burns from rushing hot plates, were meant for something else. They were meant to hold the weight of the Yale Law Journal, to sign briefs that could dismantle corporations. She had been the star of her class, the prodigy, the one Professor Albright had called a once-in-a-generation legal mind. Then, the firestorm. Now her mind, which once wrestled with Byzantine case law, was occupied with remembering that Table 7 wanted their Chateau Margaux decanted for precisely 45 minutes, and Table 12's steak had to be exactly medium rare, or Mr. Henderson would have a tantrum. Tonight, the biggest beast of all was in the building, Marcus Thorne. Even if you didn't know his face, you knew his name. Thorne was the CEO and founder of Orion Global Acquisitions, a corporate entity that behaved less like a company and more like a black hole, devouring everything in its path. He was tall, with a mane of silver hair, a brutally handsome face, and eyes that held the flat, cold indifference of a shark. He wore a custom-tailored Brioni suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire college fund. He was seated at the restaurant's prime table, the corner booth with a panoramic, God's-eye view of the city he considered his. With him were three other men, his inner circle. Elena recognized his general counsel, a perpetually nervous-looking man named Robert Harrison, and a younger, slicker executive, Blake Anderson, who seemed to be the chief sycophant. "It's done, gentlemen," Thorne boomed, his voice cutting through the restaurant's cultivated hush. Several diners looked over, annoyed, but quickly looked away when they saw who it was. When Marcus Thorne spoke, you listened. "The Helios deal is ours. The board meeting tomorrow is just a formality. The champagne." Elena flinched. That was her cue. She retrieved the $9,000 bottle of Salon 1996 from the ice bucket. As she approached, Blake Anderson was raising his own glass. "To Marcus, for pulling off the impossible. Merging with Helios Innovations gives us a total monopoly on the AI-driven logistics market. $20 billion. It's staggering." "It's not just staggering, Blake," Thorne corrected, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "It's dominance. Helios thought they were clever. Their board tried to play hardball. But they didn't count on your legal team," Harrison chimed in, eager for a crumb of praise. Thorne chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Our legal team? Oh, they're fine. But they're just hammers. I'm the architect. They thought their poison pill was so clever." Elena's hands were perfectly steady as she poured the bubbling gold liquid into Thorne's flute. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge her existence. She was just a pair of hands, a function, as inanimate as the glass she was holding. "They're fools," Thorne continued, taking the glass. "They're still arguing over Section 12, Subsection 4, the Swiss Compliance Clause. They think it gives them leverage." Harrison laughed, a thin, reedy sound. "They're clinging to that? It's boilerplate, a standard $30 million breakup fee if we fail regulatory approval. A rounding error, it's pocket change. We'll have the EU regulators rubber-stamped by Friday. Exactly, Thorne sneered, taking a deep drink. 30 million. It's the cost of doing business. Let them have their symbolic victory. We get the $20 billion prize. He set his glass down, gesturing for more. Elena refilled it, but her mind was no longer in the restaurant. It had snagged on a phrase. Section 12, subsection 4, the Swiss compliance clause. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced the fog of her exhaustion. She knew that clause. It wasn't boilerplate. It wasn't a rounding error. It was a time bomb. And Marcus Thorne, the most feared CEO in the world, was sitting right on top of it, arrogantly lighting the fuse. Elena moved away from the table on autopilot, her feet carrying her toward the polished steel of the kitchen doors. But her mind was spinning backward, through time and memory, to a brightly lit lecture hall at Yale. Professor Albright, a man with a mind like a steel trap, was pacing. "Do not be fooled by simplicity," he had boomed, his voice echoing off the oak-paneled walls. "The most dangerous predator in the legal jungle is the one that looks harmless. The clause that looks like boilerplate. The typo that looks like an accident." He had projected a slide. It was a dense block of text. "Behold," he said, "my white whale. Breton versus Gentech Pharma. A beautiful, vicious little piece of litigation. Gentech, a massive conglomerate, thought they were acquiring a small Belgian biotech firm, Breton. They glanced over a clause they assumed was a standard Swiss best efforts provision. They called it, laughably, the Swiss compliance clause. A misnomer, a trap. Elena had been sitting in the front row, her notebook already full. "It was no such thing," Albright continued. "It was a droit de rupture clause, governed by the Belgian Commercial Code, Article 719, a niche, brutal piece of law. The Swiss name was a distraction. The Gentech lawyers, arrogant and overpaid, read it as a simple penalty. What they missed was the cross-reference, a tiny 9-digit number linking to an appendix. This appendix didn't just invoke a penalty, it invoked uncapped jurisdictional liability." A murmur had gone through the class. "When Gentech failed to get a specific, obscure EU regulatory approval," Albright said, a grim smile on his face, "Breton sued. The Belgian tribunal didn't award a simple penalty. They awarded 15% of the total projected market value of the failed synergy. Gentech's lawyers thought they were on the hook for $50 million. The judge came back with a judgment of $4 billion. It bankrupted them. A $100 billion company dismantled by 2 sentences they were too lazy to read." Elena stared at the swinging kitchen door. Section 12, subsection 4, the Swiss compliance clause. It couldn't be. It was a 1-in-a-million case study, a legal ghost story. She leaned against the wall, the heat from the kitchen warming her back. Her pulse throbbed in her temples. Thorne had mentioned Helios Innovations, an AI logistics company. AI, the most heavily scrutinized, rapidly evolving regulatory landscape in the world, especially in the European Union. Thorne's team was confident they'd be rubber-stamped by Friday, but Elena had read an article just last week. The EU had, in a surprise emergency session, fast-tracked a new set of AI governance laws. Laws so new, they hadn't even been fully translated into English yet. They were stringent, complex, and aimed directly at preventing monopolies in data logistics. A deal of this magnitude, merging 2 giants like Orion and Helios, it wouldn't be rubber-stamped. It would be put under a microscope, and it would never pass by Friday. 30 million, Thorne had laughed. Elena did the math in her head, her mind clicking with the speed of an abacus. The deal was $20 billion, 15% of the total market value. Her breath caught. It wasn't $30 million, it was $3 billion. $3 billion. She felt a wave of nausea. This was the kind of mistake that didn't just end careers, it ended corporations. It would wipe out Orion Global. Thorne would be ruined. His shareholders would be ruined. A small, dark part of her whispered, "Good, let him burn." Marcus Thorne was not just another arrogant CEO. To Elena, he was a name spoken in whispers in her home, a name synonymous with ruin. He was the man who had destroyed her father. She pushed off the wall. This wasn't just a legal curiosity. This was an opportunity. But what kind? Should she let it happen? Watch from the sidelines as the man who took everything from her family finally got his karmic reward? Or she looked back through the small diamond-shaped window in the door. Thorne was laughing again, his face flushed with wine and victory. He was a king without clothes, and everyone was admiring his imaginary finery. Everyone but the waitress. Her internal conflict was a raging fire. Helping him felt like a betrayal of her father, but not helping him. Letting the bomb go off. That felt like a passive bystander. Her father had raised her to be a warrior, to use the law as a sword for justice, not a shield for hiding. And then, a third, more terrifying thought emerged. What if she could use this? Use this knowledge not just to stop the explosion, but to control it. She smoothed her apron, her hands no longer shaking. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She felt the old, familiar hum of her mind locking onto a problem, the same feeling she'd had before walking into the final round of the moot court championships. She knew what she had to do. It was a gamble that could get her fired, humiliated, and thrown out on the street. But if it worked, it could change everything. She picked up a water pitcher, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door, walking back into the lion's den. The smell of cheap whiskey and stale cigars. That was the smell of the end. It wasn't the scent of their old life, the mahogany and old books of her father's law office, the smell of his pipe tobacco and her mother's lavender. No, this new smell, the one that clung to the threadbare carpet of their tiny queen's apartment, was the smell of defeat. David Sanchez had been a lion, a brilliant principled contracts lawyer who had built his firm, Sanchez and Associates, from nothing. He was a lawyer's lawyer, the man other firms hired when they were in over their heads. He taught Elena to read contracts before she could read storybooks. "The devil isn't in the details, Mija," he'd say, tapping a dense document. "The devil is the details." 5 years ago, David took on a client, a small, innovative tech company called Aerodynamics. They were being acquired by Marcus Thorne's Orion Global. It should have been a simple, lucrative acquisition. But Thorne didn't just want to acquire Aerodynamics. He wanted to gut it. He wanted its patents for pennies on the dollar, and he wanted to discard its pension-heavy workforce. David Sanchez fought him. He found a loophole in the initial offer, a misrepresentation of assets, that would have forced Thorne to either pay the full, fair price or walk away. Thorne didn't walk away, and he didn't pay. He attacked. He unleashed his previous general counsel, a man whose name Elena spat like poison, Julian Vance. Vance didn't fight David in court. He fought him in the press and with the Bar Association. He buried David's small firm in a blizzard of procedural motions. He leaked a carefully doctored memo that suggested David Sanchez had known about a fabricated flaw in his client's patents and was trying to defraud Orion Global. It was a lie, but it was a brilliant, venomous lie. It was predatory litigation. The client, Aerodynamics, panicked. They fired David. The Bar Association, reacting to the high-profile accusations from Orion's powerful legal team, launched an investigation. David Sanchez, the most ethical man Elena had ever known, was suddenly facing disbarment for fraud. Elena, then in her second year at Yale, came home one weekend to find her father in his study. He wasn't fighting. He was just sitting in his chair, staring at the wall, a bottle of cheap whiskey on his desk. The room was dark. He ruined me, Elena," he had whispered, his voice hollow. "Vance, Thorne, they didn't just beat me. They said I'm a criminal. They told the Times I'm a fraud." "We'll fight them, Papa," she had cried, full of a law student's fire. "We'll file a countersuit. This is defamation. It's malicious prosecution." "With what?" he'd asked, his hand trembling as he lifted the glass. "They've already bankrupted me. The clients are gone. The partners left. There's nothing left." 2 days later, she found him on that same floor. The stroke was massive. The doctors said it was brought on by extreme acute stress. David Sanchez, the lion, was gone. He survived, but only as a shell. He was left nonverbal, his brilliant mind locked inside a body that wouldn't obey. The investigation was quietly dropped, but the damage was done. His reputation was gone. His firm was gone. Their money was gone. Elena dropped out of Yale. She sold their large home in Connecticut to pay for the mountain of medical bills and litigation debts. She moved what was left of her father, his body, his wheelchair, his oxygen machine, into the tiny Queen's apartment, and she became a waitress. Every night, she would come home, her feet aching, and sit by his bed. She'd read to him, not fiction but her old law textbooks. She'd read him summaries of new case law, new rulings from the Supreme Court. "They're reevaluating Chevron deference, Papa," she'd murmur, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would see a flicker in his eyes, a spark of the old fire, a glimmer of the mind that was still in there. That flicker was the only thing that kept her alive. The gilded apex was her penance, her daily humiliation. But it was also her hunting ground. She listened. She watched these men, these Thornes and Harrisons and Blakes, and she studied them. She learned their arrogance, their assumptions, their weaknesses. She had been waiting. She didn't know what for. A sign? An opportunity? Now it had been handed to her on a silver platter. Section 12, subsection 4. This wasn't just about $3 billion. This was about David Sanchez. This was about Breton versus Gentech Pharma. This was about the devil who was the details. Marcus Thorne and Robert Harrison hadn't just made a financial oversight. They had insulted the memory of her father by falling into the very kind of trap he had trained her to spot. As she walked back to the table, the weight of the water pitcher in her hand felt different. It no longer felt like a tool of service. It felt like a weapon. The ghosts of her past, her father's empty chair, the reek of whiskey, the cold hospital room, all propelled her forward. She was no longer Elena Sanchez, the waitress. She was Elena Sanchez, the daughter of David Sanchez. And class was in session. The conversation at table 12 had grown louder, more self-congratulatory. Marcus Thorne was holding court, a miniature sun around which his satellites orbited. "The beauty of it, Blake," Thorne was saying, swirling the last of the salon in his glass, "is the audacity. We didn't just buy them, we absorbed them. Their R&D department will be ours by Monday. Their patents will be folded into the Orion umbrella by Tuesday, and they're thanking us for it. It's masterful, Marcus. Truly," Blake Anderson gushed, his eyes shining with vicarious power. Robert Harrison, the general counsel, looked slightly more sober. He was the one who had to sign the paperwork after all. "The final sign-off from the EU regulators is the last hurdle, Marcus. I'm still a little concerned about the new AI governance package they just pushed." "Bah!" Thorne waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting a fly. "Bureaucrats. They'll posture, they'll demand a few minor concessions, and we'll give them a token. It's a dance. We've done it a dozen times. Don't go soft on me, Robert. That's why we have that $30 million penalty clause. It's our cost of delay insurance. It's nothing." This was it. Elena stepped forward. Her heart was a cold, hard stone in her chest. She moved to Thorne's side, pitcher in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was clear, and it sliced through his sentence like a razor. All four men stopped. The interruption was so profound, so against the natural order of this universe, that they simply stared. Thorne turned his head slowly. He didn't look at her, but through her. His eyes were Arctic blue, and they held a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He was a king interrupted by a peasant. "I am in a meeting," he said, his voice lethally low. "My glass is full. Go away." Blake Anderson snickered. "She probably wants a stock tip, boss." Elena's eyes did not waver. She kept her gaze fixed on Thorne. "My apologies, sir, but I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Thorne's annoyance flickered into disbelief, then dark amusement. He leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. "You couldn't help but what? You were eavesdropping." He looked around at his men. "The service here is getting bold." "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, her voice gaining a fraction of its old strength, "you're speaking about Section 12, subsection 4 of the Helios contract." The smirk on Thorne's face vanished. Harrison's head snapped up. "What did you just say?" Harrison asked, his voice sharp. "Section 12.4. The Swiss compliance clause, Elena repeated. You've misread it. You said it was a $30 million penalty. It's not. A heavy, dangerous silence fell over the table. The clinking of silverware from other parts of the restaurant seemed a mile away. Then Marcus Thorne began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. It was a deep, mocking, cruel laugh that radiated contempt. Blake Anderson, seeing his boss laugh, quickly joined in. Even Harrison managed a nervous, watery chuckle. Thorne wiped a tear from his eye. He looked at Elena as if she were a talking dog. You, he said, pointing a finger, a waitress, are telling me Marcus Thorne and him, he gestured to Harrison, the general counsel of a $50 billion corporation, that we misread a multi-billion-dollar contract? He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, but it was loud enough for the whole table to hear. Sweetheart, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, you're pouring wine. You don't understand contracts. You understand trays. You understand sparkling or still. Stick to what you know before you get yourself fired. The humiliation was a physical blow. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She felt the eyes of the other diners, the pitying stare of her manager from across the room. She could see Blake filming her on his phone under the table, a greasy smile on his face, no doubt to post on some internal company chat. This was the moment. She could apologize, scurry away, and spend the rest of her life in that Queen's apartment, wondering what if. Or she could burn the bridge, burn the whole restaurant, burn his whole world. She put the water pitcher down on the table. The soft clink of glass on wood sounded like a gunshot. You're right, Mr. Thorne, she said. Her voice was different now. The tremble was gone. It was cold, flat, and hard as diamond. I'm not a waitress. At least I wasn't always. Thorne's smile faltered. He hadn't expected her to talk back. And you, she said, turning her gaze to Robert Harrison, should have known better. You're a member of the New York bar. You should have at least read the case law. Harrison's face paled. What case law? Elena stood straight, her posture shifting from servant to advocate. You're reading it as a Swiss best efforts provision. It's not. The name is a classic misnomer, designed to trap lazy lawyers. It's a droit de rupture clause, governed by the Belgian Commercial Code. Thorne's amusement had completely evaporated. He was just staring. You're making that up, Harrison stammered, but he was already pulling his phone from his pocket, his thumb swiping frantically. Am I? Elena countered. Article 719, the $30 million cap you're so proud of, that only applies if Helios, the selling party, breaches the contract. Go ahead, read it. But if Orion, the acquiring party, fails to meet regulatory approval in all specified jurisdictions, and that includes the new EU AI governance laws, the clause cross-references with Appendix E, Schedule 2A. She saw the flicker of terror in Harrison's eyes. He knew. He just realized it. That cross-reference, Elena said, her voice like a judge's gavel, invokes uncapped liability. Marcus Thorne was no fool. He was a predator, and predators sensed weakness, but they also sensed sudden existential threats. The entire emotional temperature of the table had inverted. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle, terrified silence. Uncapped, Thorne said, his voice a low growl. He was trying to reclaim his authority, but the panic was visible in the tight clench of his jaw. Don't be ridiculous. No lawyer worth his salary would allow an uncapped liability clause in a deal this size. Robert? All eyes turned to Harrison. Harrison was as white as the tablecloth. His fingers were flying across his phone screen, sweat beading on his bald head. I'm checking, Marcus. The file it's massive. Appendix E. You don't need to find the file, Elena said calmly. She was in her element now. This was the courtroom. The clause invokes a specific penalty calculation. It's not just uncapped. It's tied to 15% of the total market value of the failed synergy. You stated the value of the Helios deal yourself. You called it a $20 billion prize. She paused, letting the numbers hang in the air, letting them do the work. 15% of $20 billion, she said, her voice resonating with a terrible final clarity, is $3 billion. not $30 million. You are exposed by a factor of 100, and you're walking straight into it because you think the EU regulators are just bureaucrats you can dance with. They are going to shred this merger, and when they do, Helios will activate Section 12.4, and they will take $3 billion from you. Your company, Orion Global, will be insolvent by Christmas. Blake Anderson had stopped filming. His phone clattered from his limp hand onto the table. That's impossible, Thorne whispered. He looked at Harrison. Robert, tell me she's lying. Robert Harrison finally looked up from his phone. His eyes were wide and vacant with shock. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. She's... Oh my God, Harrison stammered, his voice cracking. The Belgian code. Droit de rupture. It's real. He looked at Elena, his expression a mask of horrified awe. She's right. It's not just the code. There's precedent. Breton versus Gentech Pharma. He had found the case study. He had found the white whale. Elena nodded slowly. Yes, Breton versus Gentech. A $4 billion judgment on a $50 million assumption. A case, I might add, that is taught in the first semester of every serious international contracts class in the Ivy League. Where did you go to law school, Mr. Harrison? Because you are committing malpractice on a scale that will make the history books. Harrison flinched as if she had slapped him. Marcus Thorne didn't move. He didn't breathe. The color had drained from his face, leaving a pasty gray mask. The cigar he had been planning to smoke, a massive cohiba, slipped from his fingers and rolled onto the plush carpet. He, the man who controlled markets, who brought senators to heel, who built an empire from sheer force of will, was staring at a $3 billion crater that had just opened beneath his feet. And the only person in the world who had seen it was the waitress. He turned his full attention to her. The condescension was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a raw, primal fear. Who? He asked, his voice a rasp. Who are you? Elena allowed herself a small, cold smile. She had waited 5 years to say this name, to see the recognition, to watch the final piece of the puzzle click into place. She unpinned the simple plastic Elena name tag from her apron and let it fall to the table next to Blake's phone. My name, she said, is Elena Sanchez. Thorne just stared, the name meaning nothing to him. But she wasn't looking at Thorne. She was looking at Robert Harrison. Harrison's bloodshot eyes widened even further. The name did mean something to him. He was the general counsel. He knew the company's litigation history. Sanchez? Harrison whispered, his mind frantically connecting the dots. Sanchez, as in Sanchez and Associates? The aerodynamics acquisition? The David Sanchez malpractice suit? The air crackled. Thorne's head snapped toward Harrison, confusion and anger warring on his face. What? What is he talking about? Elena's gaze locked onto Thorne, and for the first time, she let him see the 5 years of stored-up rage, the icy hot fury that had fueled her every single day. He's talking about my father, she said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. David Sanchez, the man your firm, led by Julian Vance, fabricated evidence against. The man you ruined. The man who had a stroke trying to fight your predatory litigation. The man who is currently sitting in a wheelchair in a tiny apartment in Queens, unable to speak, all because he tried to stop you from cheating his client. She leaned in, closer than any servant should ever be to a guest. You didn't just misread a contract, Mr. Thorne, she said, the words like chips of ice. You walked into the one restaurant in the one city and sat at the one table, served by the one person on this planet who not only knew your $3 billion mistake, but who had a very, very personal reason to let you make it. The world had shrunk to the space between the four of them. The ambient noise of the gilded apex, the distant laughter, the music, the quiet hum of the city 70 floors below, had dissolved into a ringing silence. Marcus Thorne's face was a kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion, recognition, and finally dawning, abject horror. He was not just a CEO in financial jeopardy. He was a criminal whose accomplice had just turned state's evidence. Julian Vance, Thorne said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. That was years ago. That was a standard countersuit. It was a lie, Elena snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. And you signed off on it. You gave Vance his orders. You told him to handle my father, and he did. He destroyed him. And now that mishandling is about to cost you your entire company. Thorne looked at Harrison, desperate for an exit. Robert, fix this. Call the Helios team. Tell them we found a typo. We need to renegotiate. Offer them another $100 million. Offer them? Harrison was trembling, his legal mind completely shattered. Marcus, you don't understand. We have no leverage. We've already signed the agreement. It's binding. If we go to them now, hat in hand, and say, oh, by the way, we just realized we're on the hook for $3 billion, they won't renegotiate. They'll wait. They'll let the EU regulators kill the deal, and they'll send us the bill. We're trapped. She's right. We're finished. Blake Anderson, who had been frozen, finally spoke, his voice a pathetic squeak. We could sue the EU regulators? Elena actually laughed, a single, sharp, mirthless sound. Sue the European Union for enforcing its own laws? Good luck. You'd have a better chance of suing the ocean for being wet. You have exactly one and only one path out of this, and it runs through me. This was the moment. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up. Elena Sanchez, the waitress earning $15 an hour, was now the most powerful person in Marcus Thorne's life. Thorne stared at her. He was a man who had built an empire, a man who had ground countless people like David Sanchez into dust. He had never begged. He had never pleaded. He didn't even know the words, but he was learning. What? He said, his voice hoarse. What do you want? It was the question she had been waiting 5 years to hear. You're in no position to bargain, Mr. Thorne, Elena said, her voice devoid of all emotion. You're not negotiating. You are going to listen to my terms. You will accept them without alteration. If you hesitate, if you argue, if you even look like you're going to call security, I will walk out that door. I will go home. I will unplug my father's oxygen machine, and I will use my last $30 to buy a burner phone, and I will make one call to the CEO of Helios Innovations, and I will tell him to check Section 12, subsection 4. Thorne's breath hitched. He knew she meant it. So here, she said, is what is going to happen. She held up one finger. First, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., your company, Orion Global, will hold a press conference. You will be at the podium. You will publicly announce that a recent internal audit has uncovered gross misconduct regarding the aerodynamics litigation from 5 years ago. You will name Julian Vance as the architect of a campaign of malicious prosecution and evidence fabrication. Harrison started to protest. We can't. That admits liability. We'll be quiet, Robert, or I'll add your name to the press release. Elena cut him off, not even looking at him. Her eyes were locked on Thorne. You will state that the primary victim of this campaign was David Sanchez, a man of unimpeachable integrity. You will issue a full, public apology. You will announce that Orion is settling the, as yet unfiled, countersuit from the Sanchez family for an amount that we will determine later. But for now, you will restore his name. You will clear him. You will give him back the honor you stole from him. Thorne was breathing heavily, his $10,000 suit suddenly looking like a straitjacket. He was trapped. He nodded. Done. It's done. What else? Second, Elena said, holding up another finger. You're going to give me a job. Thorne nodded frantically. Anything. A senior analyst, vice president. I'll create a role for you. Head of risk assessment, a $500,000 salary. Elena smiled that cold smile again. You're still not getting it, are you? You're still trying to bargain. She leaned down and picked up Harrison's name card from the table. She looked at it, then at Harrison. I don't want a job, Mr. Thorne. I want his job. Harrison looked as if he'd been shot. What? No, Marcus, you can't. I've been with you for 20... Shut up, Robert, Thorne barked, his panic making him vicious. He looked at Elena. You want to be general counsel? You didn't even finish law school. I finished, Elena said. I took the bar exam in New York 2 years ago, under my mother's maiden name. I passed in the 99th percentile. I just preferred the quiet life. She flicked the name card. He makes, what, $3 million a year with bonuses? I want $5 million, and I want Robert Harrison and Julian Vance's badges deactivated by the time I arrive at the office tomorrow. They are to be escorted from the building with their personal effects in a cardboard box. Am I clear? You can't just fire me, Harrison wailed, tears of self-pity welling in his eyes. I just did, Elena said. Thorne was processing. He was being blackmailed, extorted. But he was also a pragmatist. He was a shark. He was losing a fin, but she was saving his life. $3 billion versus $5 million and some public humiliation. It wasn't a choice. You get your job, Thorne grated out. You get your press conference. Now, fix this. How do you fix the $3 billion bomb? Elena's smile widened. It was the first time she had smiled with any warmth all night, and it was terrifying. Oh, that's the best part, she said. I'm not going to fix it. We are. She looked at her watch. It's 10 p.m. The Helios board meeting is tomorrow at noon. You, Mr. Thorne, are going to get on your phone, and you are going to postpone that meeting. You're going to tell them your legal team, that's me, has found a critical mutual error in the regulatory projections that needs to be addressed before the deal can be finalized. They'll be furious, Thorne said. Let them be furious, Elena replied. It's better than them being $3 billion richer. And then tomorrow, after my father's name is cleared and my contract is signed, I am going to walk into your office as the new general counsel of Orion Global, and I am going to draft a new amendment to Section 12, and I am going to personally fly to Brussels, and I am going to renegotiate this deal, not just to fix your mistake, but to give us the advantage. She finally picked up the water pitcher, her original task. You, she said to Thorne, are going to trust me to save your company, the same way my father's client trusted him. The difference is, I'm going to win. She turned and walked away from the table, leaving the three most powerful men in the room sitting in the ruins of their own arrogance, their $9,000 champagne tasting like ash. The next 24 hours moved at the speed of a shockwave. By 10:30 p.m., Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of controlled fury, had made the call. Elena watched from the shadows of the restaurant's service station as he spoke into his phone, his voice a low growl. He was postponing the Helios meeting. The first domino had fallen. By 11 p.m., Elena had hung up her apron for the last time. She didn't clock out. She simply walked out the front door, past the stunned maitre d', and into a cab, the first cab she had taken in 3 years. By 9 a.m., she was not in a waitress uniform. She was wearing her one good suit, a simple black 2-year-old theory suit she had bought on clearance for her bar exam. She stood at the back of the Orion Global Press Auditorium, an anonymous face in a sea of reporters. She watched Marcus Thorne walk to the podium. He looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. His silver hair was slightly askew. He read from a prepared statement, his voice a monotone. A deeply regrettable chapter in our company's history. A campaign of malicious prosecution, gross ethical violations led by former counsel, Mr. Julian Vance. Our internal audit has concluded that Mr. David Sanchez was not only innocent of all accusations, but was a victim of these predatory tactics. Orion Global extends its most profound and unreserved apology to Mr. Sanchez and his family. Elena's eyes stung. She didn't cry. It wasn't relief she felt, not yet. It was the cold, satisfying click of a tumbler falling into place. By 9:15 a.m., the financial news was exploding. Orion Global's stock dipped 4% on the news of legal instability. By 9:30 a.m., Elena was on the 70th floor of the Orion building, the same floor as the Gilded Apex, just one building over. She was in the HR department, signing an employment contract. It was exactly as she had dictated. $5 million base salary, title, general counsel, and executive vice president. As she signed, 2 security guards were walking a red-faced Robert Harrison out of his office, a small cardboard box in his hands. By 10 a.m., she was sitting in that same office. It was enormous. One wall was all glass, overlooking the city. She took a moment, just one, to sit in the plush leather chair and look at the view. It was the same view she had seen from the restaurant, but it was no longer a cage, it was a kingdom. Her new assistant, a nervous but efficient woman named Sarah, buzzed in. "Ms. Sanchez, Mr. Thorne is ready for you in the main conference room. He says to tell you your team is assembled." Elena stood. "Thank you, Sarah. Please have a car ready. I need to be at LaGuardia in 3 hours. And get me the CEO of Helios Innovations on a secure line. Tell him the new general counsel for Orion Global has a proposal." She walked into the conference room. Thorne was at the head of the table looking haggard. The remaining legal team, the ones who hadn't been fired, were staring at her with a mixture of terror and disbelief. They had just seen their boss eviscerated in a press conference, and their other boss, Harrison, fired and replaced by a waitress? "Good morning, gentlemen," Elena said, taking a seat not at the table, but in the chair right next to Thorne, a position of equal power. "For those of you I haven't met, I am Elena Sanchez. As of 30 minutes ago, I am your new general counsel, and as of this moment, we have a $3 billion fire to put out." She plugged her laptop, a 5-year-old model with a cracked screen, into the massive holographic projector. "Mr. Thorne made you all aware of the oversight in Section 12.4. What he doesn't know is that the problem is even worse." Thorne's head shot up. "Worse? What do you mean worse? You said $3 billion. "The $3 billion is the penalty," Elena said calmly, "but it's not the cause. The cause is the EU AI governance laws. I spent last night reading all 800 pages of the provisional Belgian translation. Your team assumed you'd be rubber-stamped, but this law specifically prohibits a single entity from controlling more than 40% of the data logistics market. This merger, as written, would give Orion Helios 55%. It's not just going to be scrutinized, it's dead on arrival. It will never be approved. The $3 billion penalty isn't a risk, it's a certainty." The room plunged into utter despair. "So it's over," Thorne whispered, slumping in his chair. "We're bankrupt." "No," Elena said. "It's not over, because Helios doesn't know this." She pointed to the screen. "They think their $30 million penalty clause is just a $30 million penalty, same as you did. They're angry you postponed, but they're not suspicious yet. They think this is just a normal regulatory delay." "So what's the play?" Thorne asked, his voice now that of a student, not a master. "The play," Elena said, "is that I am not going to Brussels to beg. I am going to Brussels to attack. I am going to call the Helios CEO and tell him that our internal audit found that their disclosures on their EU market share were materially deficient. I'm going to argue that they misrepresented their position, which makes them the party in breach." A lawyer in the back spoke up. But that's not true. They didn't misrepresent." "They didn't," Elena agreed, "but they also didn't provide the new projections based on the new law. It's a gray area. It's an ambiguity, and I am going to drive a $3 billion truck through it." She outlined the plan. It was audacious, vicious, and brilliant. She wouldn't just be fixing the $3 billion error. She was going to use the threat of the $3 billion error, which she would frame as their fault, to force Helios back to the table. "We don't just want the penalty clause removed," Elena said, her eyes flashing. "We want a new deal. This merger can't happen as a single entity. So we're going to break it apart. We'll acquire their R&D and patent portfolio, which is what we wanted all along, and we'll force them to sell their logistics division to a third party as a divestiture. We won't get 55% of the market. We'll get 30%, and we'll get all their patents. And we're going to pay 40% less for the privilege." She looked at Thorne. "You wanted to buy Helios for $20 billion. I'm going to give you their brain for $12 billion, and we're going to let someone else deal with the regulatory nightmare of their logistics. We're not just avoiding a $3 billion loss, Mr. Thorne. We are going to clear an $8 billion profit." The room was silent. Marcus Thorne stared at her, and for the first time, the fear in his eyes was replaced by something else. Greed, respect. "My God," he whispered, "you're not David's daughter. You're a shark." Elena closed her laptop. "I learned from the best, Mr. Thorne. I learned from you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to catch." 1 year later. The 70th floor office of the general counsel no longer held a cracked laptop. It was a command center. Elena Sanchez sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, her hair now cut in a sharp, professional bob. She wore a dark blue Armani suit that was impeccably tailored. She was no longer a waitress, no longer a ghost. She was, quite possibly, the most powerful lawyer in New York. Her flight to Brussels had become the stuff of corporate legend. She had landed, walked into the Helios headquarters with no team, and systematically, surgically, dismantled their legal position. She used their own arrogance against them. She proved in a 4-hour meeting that their deficient projections would have triggered the $3 billion penalty, and that Orion would have been legally entitled to sue them for fraudulent inducement. By the end of the week, Helios had caved. The deal was rewritten. Orion Global acquired the Helios AI patent portfolio for $12 billion. The logistics division was sold off. Orion's stock, after the initial dip, didn't just recover, it tripled. Elena Sanchez hadn't just saved the company. She had made it an untouchable titan. Her first act upon returning was to personally oversee the settlement for her father. It was a 9-figure sum that was quietly transferred to a trust. With it, she moved her father out of the Queen's apartment and into a private, state-of-the-art neurological care facility in upstate New York. She visited him every Sunday. She was there now, sitting by his bed in a sun-drenched room that overlooked a garden. She was reading to him, not a law book, a newspaper. The Wall Street Journal is calling it the most stunning corporate turnaround of the decade. "Papa," she said softly, folding the paper, "they're calling me the $3 billion waitress? It's a stupid name, but it's catchy." David Sanchez was still in his wheelchair, but he was not the hollow shell he had been. With the best care in the world, his name cleared, and his daughter's presence, the light had returned to his eyes. He couldn't speak, but he could move his right hand. Slowly, painstakingly, he reached out and squeezed her hand. A single tear rolled down his cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pride. Elena squeezed back. "I miss you, Papa." He squeezed her hand twice. "I know." She kissed his forehead and stood up. "I have to go. Big day at the office." She flew back to the city in the company helicopter. When she arrived at Orion Global, the atmosphere was electric. She walked straight to the main boardroom. It was full. The entire board of directors was assembled. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne. In the years since Elena's arrival, Thorne's position had become precarious. She had saved him, yes, but in doing so, she had exposed his recklessness. The press conference she forced him to give had opened the floodgates. Dozens of other aerodynamics cases had emerged. Small companies, ruined partners, all with stories of Julian Vance and Marcus Thorne's predatory tactics. The board was furious. The company was profitable, but its reputation was in tatters. Thorne was a liability, and Elena was the hero. She took her seat. "The vote is unanimous, Marcus," the lead director, a woman named Catherine Bishop, said, her voice heavy. "The board has accepted your resignation. Your golden parachute will be adequate, but you will clean out your desk by the end of the day." Thorne, the silver-haired lion, looked old. He was defeated. He just nodded, signed the last paper, and stood up. He didn't look at anyone. As he walked toward the door, he passed Elena. He stopped, just for a second. You did this," he whispered, his voice a venomous rasp. "You didn't just want a job. You wanted it all. This was your plan from the minute you heard Section 12.4, wasn't it?" Elena looked up at him, her face calm and unreadable. "You taught me to be thorough, Marcus," she said. "You're the architect. I'm just the hammer. Now please, get out of my chair." Thorne's face went purple, but he said nothing. He turned and left the room. The door snicked shut behind him. A silence fell. Catherine Bishop looked at Elena. "Ms. Sanchez," Catherine said, "the board has also voted unanimously on a successor. We believe this company needs to move into a new era, one of precision, of ethics, and of unshakable strength. We believe you are that new era." Elena looked around the table, at the faces of the most powerful people in the country. 1 year ago, she had been serving them champagne. Today, they were offering her the crown. She stood up and smoothed her suit jacket. She walked to the head of the table. the chair that Thorne had just vacated, and turned to face her new board. "Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the vast room. "I accept. Now let's get to work. My first order of business, I want to talk about Julian Vance. He's still practicing law in Delaware. I think it's time we paid him a visit. Sarah, get me the Attorney General." And that's the story of how a $10,000 suit and a $3 billion ego were brought down by a $30 apron and a mind like a steel trap. Elena Sanchez didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She proved that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what job you're forced to do. True power isn't about the title on your door, it's about the knowledge in your head and the fire in your heart. The men who laughed at her learned that lesson the hard way. They thought she was just serving wine, but she was serving a summons, 5 years in the making. What did you think of Elena's incredible journey from humiliation to ultimate power? Have you ever seen someone so arrogant get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. If you love this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see a good triumph, and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell. We drop stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching.